The Evolving Skies Alt Hearts are some of the best cards Pokemon has ever made, but there is one glaring issue with this card in particular. Yellow, sure, it works, it's fine, but Umbreon would surely be better served by some other colour. Yeah, that'd do. Figured if I'm gonna fix it, may as well do the rest while I'm at it. The process I used started with a huge saturation layer. I'd pick the hue I needed, invert the mask, go to the select and mask workspace, then basically paint the areas that needed to change back in. To do this, I used a combo of mostly the quick selection tool with a bit of help from the brush tool, pushing and pulling the selection to get every edge right. Then I'd repeat for any other colours that were needed. That is, when it all worked. Unfortunately, Photoshop is a temperamental pain in the ass, so I did come across a couple of issues. The most consistent of these occurred on every single card I did. When opening the Select and Mask workspace, I was unable to do any zooming with the scroll wheel. To fix this, I changed the view mode and immediately switched it back, which got it working. Because, obviously. Straight out the gate with that Umbreon V, I found when I changed the yellow to blue, some of the highlights came out quite jarring. To solve this, I used the color picker, selected a color close to the highlight, then painted over it with a very soft brush at 50% opacity. Seemed to dull it nicely. While working on the Dragonite, I noticed some weird blocky areas around the wing. While this may technically not have been Photoshop's fault, I say we blame it all the same. Anyway, I solved this after finishing the shiny swap in a similar fashion to Umbreon, using the basic brush tool and sampling colour directly around the problem areas before painting away the artifacts. No need to be perfect here, it's pretty small in the end. Now, Neuven was a real toughie. I think the problem lay in the fact that it started with a really dark base colour and brightening seemed to be much harder than darkening. I tried many things with the hue saturation layer, but it all felt off. So instead I used a solid colour layer with the colour blending mode. The result was fine-ish. I wasn't overly pleased, but the light green of the shiny feels like it kind of goes against the theme of the card anyway, so I wasn't too worried. Other than that, everything was pretty straightforward. I may have forgotten to do the little evolves from Duraludon V marker. It was in this moment writing the script I realised I completely forgot an entire card. Sorry if you like Duraludon V, but 16 was an awfully convenient number, printed nicely, and if there was a card to miss, this would probably be my second choice, behind only Duraludon VMAX. To be fair, here is where the card sits in the set list. I thought it was a trainer. Oops. I decided to leave Leafeon and Glaceon to the end, so they were the last four. Let's be honest, shiny versions of these cards would be basically unchanged. As such, I decided to go with some custom shinies. First off, Glaceon was tricky. I went online to find some inspiration, but didn't instantly find anything I loved, so I started experimenting. I tried a fair few variations, but none of them felt right. Eventually, after walking away for a day or so, I remembered a video I'd seen by TrueGreen7 in which he said,
"A good amount of viewers got annoyed that my chat would constantly vote for the black or white shinies that I made. It makes sense since 9 times out of 10, if you give a Pokemon a black shiny, they're gonna look sick."
Yep, solid. Not great, but solid. And then Leafeon. Let's be honest, there was one option. It's popular, maybe overused, but golly, it is fantastic. I legitimately think that V is my favourite card of all of them. My favourite V card. Once the arts were done, I needed to prepare some actual cards for customization. I planned to use some old reverse holos. I'd use tissues and acetone, remove the ink, leaving a nice shiny blank holo card. I repeated the process 15 more times and learned a couple of things. Brighter types are a lot easier. Grass, water, normal I found to be best. Once it starts to go foggy, you need to move on to another part of the tissue. The bit you're using is saturated. And maybe don't do 15 at once. Unless they're like the types I said before, it took a couple of hours and by the end my fingers were killing me. It might also be wise to consider not using the acetone directly on your cutting mat. Not speaking from experience or anything, just a recommendation. Next, I grabbed some cheap transparency paper I'd found on Amazon and printed out all the cards. Phew, the result was not good. Look, this technique always loses a bit of brightness and saturation in the end, as the holo cards aren't bright enough to fully show it off. I fully expected that, but looking closely at these prints, the quality was just not there. I thought for a second it might be the printer, but looking at my practice prints, they were fine. Maybe it was some low quality transparency paper, maybe the printer struggles specifically with the stuff, I don't know, but this was a real blow. I'd spent so long struggling through first Photoshop and figuring out those arts, then removing the ink from all those cards only to stumble at this final hurdle. I was that close to giving up, I just had no idea what to do. Then, I found my solution in a video by Ken Versus, outlining a different technique entirely for creating proxy cards. I wouldn't follow it all exactly, but my primary takeaway was the use of cold laminate film to create the holo effect, rather than actual holo cards. Re-inspired, I reprinted all the designs onto regular paper, covered them with the film, and cut them all out. Definitely apply middle to outside for better adhesion. As long as you're not worried about the edges of the paper, my first try resulted in some wicked curling. If you do make a mistake, I found I could fairly easily push out bubbles once they were all cut out. I then did a quick trial run gluing SP onto a simple energy card, following the instructions on the glue can of course. Whatever they were. If I was smart, I probably would have made all those grey borders larger, cut them to excess and then trimmed back once the gluing was done, but that might make centering more difficult than it already was. Besides, I was sick of trying to format these things in Google Docs, and I thought Photoshop was temperamental. Irregardless, I found the yellow borders were slightly peeking out from behind the art despite my best efforts. An attempt to fix this via Sharpie, while poor in result, showed promise. So I did another trial, this time with Neuven, colouring the borders of the card beforehand. This time, I put much less effort into aligning the art and the result was still better. I decided to colour the rest of the borders off camera because I felt it may be too visually interesting for many to handle. So let's just skip to the good bit where the cards assemble themselves, shall we? Honestly, I'm kinda stoked with these. When the Transparencies came out as poorly as they did, I was really concerned, but this final result is really solid. I still think there's plenty of room for improvement in future, and I think there's some potential with the other technique that I'd like to try, but overall, I think these are really quite good.